Thank you, Ms. Haugen, for your direct answers and for being willing to come out and, provide such clarity on so many of these issues. Obviously, Facebook can manipulate its algorithms to attract users. And I guess my question would be, do you feel, in your humble opinion, that simply maximizing profits, no matter the societal impact, that is justified? And I think the question then would be, that's the short question, which I think I know the answer. What impact to Facebook's bottom line would it have if the algorithm was changed to promote safety and to, instead of, change to save the lives of young women rather than putting them at risk?
I'm learning about the talk button. Facebook today has a profit, makes approximately $40 billion a year in profit. A lot of the changes that I'm talking about are not going to make Facebook an unprofitable company. It just won't be a ludicrously profitable company like it is today. Engagement-based ranking, which causes those amplification problems that leads young women from innocuous topics like healthy recipes to anorexia content. If it were removed, people would consume less content on Facebook, but Facebook would still be profitable. And so I encourage oversight and public scrutiny into how these algorithms work and the consequences of them.
Right. Well, and I appreciate that. I'm a former small business owner. I owned started a brew pub back in 1988, and really was always, we worked very hard to look. Again, we weren't doing investigations, but we were very sensitive to whether someone had had too much to drink, whether we had a frequent customer who was frequently putting himself at risk and others. Obviously, I think the Facebook business model poses risk to youth and to teens. You compared it to cigarette companies, which I thought was rightfully so. I guess the question is this level of risk appropriate? Or is there a level of risk that would be appropriate?
I think there is an opportunity to reframe some of these oversight actions. So when we think of them as these trade-offs of it's either profitability or safety, I think that's a false choice. And then in reality, the thing I'm asking for is a move from short-termism, which is what Facebook is run under today, right? Is being led by metrics and not led by people. And that with appropriate oversight and some of these constraints, it's possible that Facebook could actually be a much more profitable company 5 or 10 years down the road because it wasn't as toxic. Not as many people quit it. But that's one of those counterfactuals that we can't actually test. So regulation might actually make Facebook more profitable over the long term.
Right. And that's often the case. I think the same could be said for automobiles and go down the list.
Exactly.
Of all those things. Yeah. That there's so much pushback in the beginning. I also thought that the question of how do we assess the impact to their bottom line. We had a representative of Facebook in here recently who talked about that 8 out of 10 Facebook users feel their life is better and that their job is to get to 10 out of 10. Maybe this is the 20% that they're missing. I don't know how large the demographic is of people that are caught back up into this circuitous sense of really taking them down into the wrong direction. How many people that is? Do you have any idea?
That quote last week was really shocking to me because I don't know if you're aware of this, but in the case of cigarettes, only about 10% of people who smoke ever get lung cancer, right? So the idea that 20% of your users could be facing serious mental health issues and that's not a problem is shocking. I also want to emphasize for people that eating disorders are serious, right? There are going to be women walking around this planet in 60 years with brittle bones because of choices that Facebook made around emphasizing profit today. Or there are going to be women when they're in 20 years who want to have babies who can't because they're infertile as a result of eating disorders today. They're serious. And I think there's an opportunity here for having public oversight and public involvement, especially in matters that impact children.
Great. Well, thank you for being so direct on this and for stepping forward. I yield back the floor, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Hickenlooper. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Haugen, welcome. Thank you for your testimony. When it concerns Facebook, there are a number of concerns that this committee and Congress has been focused on. Two of the biggest have been Facebook's intentional targeting of kids with content that is harmful to the children. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, and a discrete issue, is the pattern of Facebook and social media engaging in political censorship. I want to start with the first issue, targeting kids. As you're aware, and as indeed the documents that you provided indicated, Facebook's, according to the public reporting on it, Facebook's internal reports found that Instagram makes, quote, body image issues worse for 1 in 3 teen girls. And additionally, it showed that, quote, 13% of British users and 6% of American users trace their desire to kill themselves to Instagram. Is that a fair and accurate characterization of what Facebook's research concluded?
I only know what I read in the documents that were included in my disclosure. That is an accurate description of the ones that I have read. Because Facebook has not come forward with the total corpus of their known research, I don't know what their other things say. But yes, there is documents that say those things.
So we had testimony last week in the Senate with a witness from Facebook who claimed that information was not accurate and needed to be in context. Now, of course, she wasn't willing to provide the context, the alleged mysterious context. Do you know of any context that would make those data anything other than horrifying and deeply disturbing?
Engagement-based ranking and these processes of amplification, they impact all users of Facebook. The algorithms are very smart in the sense that they latch on to things that people want to continue to engage with. And unfortunately, in the case of teen girls and things like self-harm, they develop these feedback cycles where children are using Instagram as to self-soothe, but then are exposed to more and more content that makes them hate themselves. This is a thing where we can't say 80% of kids are okay. We need to say, how do we save all the kids?
The Wall Street Journal reported that Mark Zuckerberg was personally aware of this research. Do you have any information one way or the other as to Mr. Zuckerberg's awareness of the research?
We have one of the documents included in the disclosures, it details something called Project Daisy, which is an initiative to remove likes off of Instagram. The internal research showed that removing likes off Instagram is not effective as long as you leave comments on those posts. And yet the research directly presented to Mark Zuckerberg said, we should still pursue this as a feature to launch, even though it's not effective, because the government, journalists, and academics want us to do this. Like it would get us positive points with the public. That kind of duplicity is why we need to have more transparency, and why, if we want to have a system that is coherent with democracy, we must have public oversight from Congress.
Do you know if Facebook, any of the research it conducted, attempted to quantify how many teenage girls may have taken their lives because of Facebook's products?
I am not aware of that research.
Do you know if Facebook made any changes when they got back that 13% of British users and 6% of American users traced their desire to kill themselves to Instagram? Do you know if they made any changes in response to that research to try to correct or mitigate that?
I found it very surprising that when Antonia Davis was confronted with this research last week, she couldn't enumerate a 5-point plan, a 10-point plan of the actions that they took. I also find it shocking that once Facebook had this research, it didn't disclose it to the public, because this is the kind of thing that should have oversight from Congress.
So when you were at Facebook, were there discussions about how to respond to this research?
I did not work directly on issues concerning children. These are just documents that were freely available in the company, so I am not aware of that.
Okay. Do you have thoughts as to what kind of changes Facebook could make to reduce or eliminate these harms?
You mentioned earlier concerns around free speech. A lot of the things that I advocate for are around changing the mechanisms of amplification, not around picking winners and losers in the marketplace of ideas.
So explain what that means.
Oh, sure. So like I mentioned before, you know, like how on Twitter, if you have to click through on a link before you reshare it, small actions like that friction don't require picking good ideas and bad ideas. They just make the platform less twitchy, less reactive. And Facebook's internal research says that each one of those small actions dramatically reduces misinformation, hate speech, and violence inciting content on the platform.
So, and we're running out of time, but on the second major topic of concern of Facebook, which is censorship, based on what you've seen, are you concerned about political censorship at Facebook and in big tech?
I believe you cannot have a system that has as big an impact on society as Facebook does today with as little transparency as it does. I'm a strong proponent of chronological ranking, or ordering by time with a little bit of spam demotion, because I think we don't want computers deciding what we focus on. We should have software that is human scaled, where humans have conversations together, not computers facilitating who we get to hear from.
So how could we get more transparency? What would produce that?
I strongly encourage the development of some kind of regulatory body that could work with academics, work with researchers, work with other government agencies to synthesize requests for data that are privacy conscious. This is an area that I'm really passionate about. Because right now, no one can force Facebook to disclose data. And Facebook has been stonewalling us, or even worse, they gave inaccurate data to researchers, as the scandal recently showed.
What data should they turn over? My time's expired, so.
For example, even data as simple as what integrity systems exist today and how well do they perform? Like, there are lots and lots of people who Facebook is conveying around the world that Facebook safety systems apply to their language, and those people aren't aware that they're using a raw, original, dangerous version of Facebook. Just basic actions like transparency would make a huge difference.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Senator Cruz. Senator Loomis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony. If you were in my seat today instead of your seat, what documents or unanswered questions would you seek from Facebook, especially as it relates to children, but even generally speaking?
I think any research regarding what Facebook does problematic use, i.e. the addictiveness of the product, is of vital importance. And anything around what Facebook knows about parents' lack of knowledge about the platform. I only know about the documents that I have seen, right? I did not work on teens or child safety myself. But in the documents that I read, Facebook articulates the idea that parents today are not aware of how dangerous Instagram is. And because they themselves did not live through these experiences, they can't coach their kids on basic safety things. And so, at a minimum, Facebook should have to disclose what it knows in that context.
Okay, so we're trying to protect individuals' data that they're gathering, have data privacy, but have transparency in the manner in which the data is used. Can we bridge that gap?
Imagine, I think reasonable people can have a conversation on how many people need to see a piece of content before it's not really private. Like, if 100,000 people see something, is it private? If 25,000 people see it, is it private? Just disclosing the most popular content on the platform, including statistics around what factors went into the promotion of that content, would cause radically more transparency than we have today on how Facebook chooses what we get to focus on, how they shape our reality.
Okay, if our focus is protecting the First Amendment and our rights to free speech while very carefully regulating data privacy, I've heard there are a number of things that are being discussed in Congress. Everything from antitrust laws to calling Facebook a utility, to the idea that you just raised of a regulatory board of some sort that has authority to, through understanding of the algorithms and how they're used and other mechanisms that create what we see, the face of Facebook, so to speak. Tell me a little more about how you envision that board working. What is in your mind, based on your understanding of the company and the ill consequences, what is the best approach to bridging the gap between keeping speech free and protecting individual privacy with regard to data?
So I think those issues are, they're independent issues. So we can talk about free speech first, which is having more transparency. Like Facebook has solutions today that are not content-based. And I am a strong advocate for non-content-based solutions because those solutions will also then protect the most vulnerable people in the world. In a place like Ethiopia where they speak 6 languages, if you have something that focuses on good ideas and bad ideas, those systems don't work in diverse places. So investing in non-content-based ways to slow the platform down not only protects our freedom of speech, it protects people's lives. The second question is around privacy. And this question of how can we have oversight and have privacy? There is lots and lots of research on how to abstract data sets. So you're not showing people's names. You might not even be showing the content of their post. You might be showing data that is about the content of their post, but not the post itself. There are many ways to structure these data sets that are privacy conscious. And the fact that Facebook has walled off the ability to see even basic things about how the platform performs, or in the case of their past academic research, releasing inaccurate data, or not being clear about how they pulled that data, is just part of a pattern of behavior of Facebook hiding behind walls and operating in the shadows. And they have far too much power in our society to be allowed to continue to operate that way.
Well, I had heard you make the analogy earlier to the tobacco industry, and I think that that's an appropriate analogy. I really believe we're searching for the best way to address the problem. And I'm not sure that it is the heavy hands, like breaking up companies or calling them a utility, which is why your approach of integrating people who understand the math and the uses of the math with protecting privacy is intriguing to me. So the more information that you can provide to us about how that might work to actually address the problem, I think would be helpful. So in my case, this is an invitation to you to provide to my office or the committee information about how we can get at the root of the problem that you've identified and can document, and save people's privacy. So I extend that invitation to you, and I thank you for your testimony. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thanks, Senator Lummis. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witness here. It's been a good hearing. A lot of information's been learned, particularly on the issue of how this is impacting our kids. I think we're going to look back 20 years from now, and all of us are going to be like, what in the hell were we thinking? When we recognize the damage that it's done to a generation of kids. Do you agree with that, Ms. Hugan?
When Facebook has made statements in the past about how much benefit Instagram is providing to kids' mental health, like kids are connecting who were once alone, what I'm so surprised about that is if Instagram is such a positive force, have we seen a golden age of teenage mental health in the last 10 years? Yeah. No, we've seen
the opposite, right?
We've seen escalating rates of suicide and depression amongst teenagers.
And do you think those rates are at least in part driven by the social media phenomenon?
There is a broad swath of research that supports the idea that usage of social media amplifies the risk for these mental health harms.
So right now, and this hearing is helping illuminate it, we are seeing...
And Facebook's own research shows that.
Right?
Yeah.
Say that again, that's important.
And Facebook's own research shows that. Right, that kids are saying, I am unhappy when I use Instagram and I can't stop. That if I leave, I'm afraid I'll be ostracized.
Right.
And that's so sad.
So they know that.
That's what their research shows.
So what do you think drives them to... I had this discussion with the witness last week, and I said, well, you know, I think they called it their timeout or stop. I said, but isn't that incompatible with your business model? Because your business model is more time online, more eyeballs online. Isn't that the fundamental elements of their business model?
Facebook has had both an interesting opportunity and a hard challenge from being a closed system. So they have had the opportunity to hide their problems. And like often people do when they can hide their problems, they get in over their heads. And I think Facebook needs an opportunity to have Congress step in and say, guess what? You don't have to struggle by yourself anymore. You don't have to hide these things from us. You don't have to pretend they're not problems. You can declare moral bankruptcy, and we can figure out how to fix these things together. Because we solve problems together, we don't solve them alone.
And by moral bankruptcy, one of the things that I appreciate the phrase that the chairman and you've been using is one of those elements, which is they know this is a problem. They know it's actually impacting negatively the mental health of the most precious assets we have in America, our youth, our kids. I have 3 daughters. They know that that is happening, and yet the moral bankruptcy, from your perspective, is the continuation of this simply because that's how they make money?
I phrase it slightly differently. We have financial bankruptcy because we value people's lives more than we value money, right? The people get in over their heads and they need a process where they admit they did something wrong, but we have a mechanism where we forgive them and we have a way for them to move forward. Facebook is stuck in a feedback loop that they cannot get out of. They have been hiding this information because they feel trapped, right? Like they would have come forward if they had solutions to these things. They need to admit they did something wrong and that they need help to solve these problems. And that's what moral bankruptcy is.
Let me ask, I'm going to switch gears here, and this is, what's your current position right now in terms of its disinformation and counter-espionage?
My last role at Facebook was in counter-espionage.
I'm sorry, your last role, okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things, this is a very different topic, and I only got a minute or so left, but right now, is Facebook, I know Facebook is not allowed in countries like China, but do they provide platforms for authoritarian or terrorist-based leaders like the Ayatollahs in Iran, that's the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, or the Taliban, or Xi Jinping, in my view, our biggest rival for this century, a communist party dictator who's trying to export his authoritarian model around the world. Do they provide a platform for those kind of leaders who, in my view, clearly don't hold America's interests in mind? Does Facebook provide that platform?
During my time working with the Threat Intelligence Org, so I was a product manager supporting the counter-espionage team. My team directly worked on tracking Chinese participation on the platform, surveilling, say, Uyghur populations in places around the world, that you could actually find the Chinese based on them doing these kinds of things.
So Facebook, I'm sorry.
We also saw active participation of, say, the Iran government doing espionage on other state actors. So this is definitely a thing that is happening, and I believe Facebook's consistent understaffing of the counter-espionage, information operations, and counterterrorism teams is a national security issue, and I'm speaking to other parts of Congress about that.
So you are saying, in essence, that the platform, whether Facebook knows it or not, is being utilized by some of our adversaries in a way that helps push and promote their interests at the expense of America's?
Yes, Facebook's so very aware that this is happening on the platform. And I believe the fact that Congress doesn't get a report of exactly how many people are working on these things internally is unacceptable, because you have a right to keep the American people safe.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator Sullivan. You may have just opened an area for another hearing.
Sorry. Yeah, I have strong national security concerns about how Facebook operates today.
Well, Mr. Chairman, maybe we should, right? I mean, it's a important issue.
Not being at all facetious. Thank you for your questions on this topic, and I know you have a busy schedule, but we may want to discuss this issue with you, members of our committee, at least informally, and if you'd be willing to come back for another hearing. That certainly is within the realm of possibility. I haven't consulted the ranking member, but or the chairwoman, but thank you for your honesty and your candor on that topic. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. First off, thanks for coming forward, and thanks for coming forward in a manner that you want to have positive change. So that's not always what happens. Earlier this year, I sent a letter to Facebook and other social media platforms asking them to detail the harmful impacts, including effects on mental health, their platforms have on children and teens. So your reports reveal that Facebook has been clearly fully aware of this for a while, and the harmful impacts, especially on young women. So I think we all agree that's completely unacceptable, and we've got to figure out how we protect the people that are vulnerable in this country from the harmful impacts of Facebook and other social media platforms. So first off, do you think there should be greater consideration for age when it comes to using any social media?
I strongly encourage raising age limits to 16 or 18 years old based on looking at the data around problematic use or addiction on the platform and children's self-regulation issues.
So I think you addressed this a little bit, but why do you think Facebook didn't address this publicly when they figured it out internally that they were having an adverse impact on young people, especially young women? Why didn't they come forward and say, we've got a problem, we've got to figure this out?
I have a huge amount of empathy for Facebook. These are really, really hard questions. Mm-hmm. And part of why I was saying I think they feel a little trapped and isolated is the problems that are driving negative social comparison on Instagram. Facebook's own research says Instagram is actually distinctly worse than, say, TikTok or Snapchat or Reddit because TikTok is about doing fun things with your friends. Snapchat is about faces and augmented reality. Reddit is vaguely about ideas, but Instagram is about bodies and about comparing lifestyles. And so I think there are real questions where like Instagram would have to come in and think hard about their product or about like what is their product about. And I don't think those answers are immediately obvious. But that's why I believe we need to solve problems together and not alone, because collaborating with the public will give us better solutions.
So do you think Facebook was trying to mitigate the problem?
I think within the set of incentives that they were working within, they did the best they could. Unfortunately, those incentives are not sustainable and they are not acceptable in our society.
Do you think Facebook and other social media platforms ought to be required to report any harmful effects they have on young people?
One of the things that I found very interesting after the report in the Wall Street Journal on teen mental health was that a former executive at the company said Facebook needs to be able to have private research. And the part that I was offended by this was Facebook has had some of this research on the negative effects of Instagram on teenagers for years. I strongly support the idea that Facebook should have a year, maybe 18 months to have private research. But given that they are the only people in the world who can do this kind of research, that the public never gets to do it, they shouldn't be allowed to keep secrets when people's lives are on the line.
Right. So,
because to be clear, if they make $40 billion a year, they have the resources to solve these problems. They're choosing not to solve them.
Yeah. Didn't that surprise you? They wouldn't put more effort into this?
I know.
Because you know it's going to catch up with them eventually, right?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you?
Like I mentioned earlier to Senator Hickenlooper, right? Coming in and having oversight might actually make Facebook a more profitable company 5 or 10 years from now. Because toxicity, Facebook's own research shows they have something called an integrity holdout. These are people who don't get protections from integrity systems to see what happens to them. Right. And those people who deal with a more toxic, painful version of Facebook use Facebook less. And so one could reason a kinder, friendlier, more collaborative Facebook might actually have more users 5 years from now. So it's in everyone's interest.
Do you think, I've got a bill, and there's a lot of bills that I think we've all talked about, but mine is called the Data Act. It's going to require express consent from users for large platforms to use algorithms on somebody. You agree with that? Shouldn't we consent before they get to take everything about us and go sell it? Pick how they send things to us?
For selling personal data, that is an issue I believe people should have substantially more control over. Most people are not well informed on what the personal costs of having their data sold are. And so I worry about pushing that choice back on individual consumers. In terms of should people consent to working with algorithms, I worry that if Facebook is allowed to give users the choice of do you want an engagement-based newsfeed or do you want a chronological newsfeed, like ordered by time, maybe a little spam demotion, that people will choose the more addictive option, that engagement-based ranking, even if it is leading their daughters to eating disorders.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Scott. I think we have concluded the first round, unless we're missing someone who is online and not hearing anyone. Let's go to the second round. Thank you again for your patience. I know you have a hard stop, I think, at 1:30, so we'll be respectful of that limitation. And I'll begin by asking a few questions. First, let me say, Senator Klobuchar very aptly raised with you the principal obstacle to our achieving legislative reform in the past, which is the tons of money spent on lobbyists and other kinds of influence peddling, to use a pejorative word, that is so evident here in the United States Congress. Some of it's dark money, some of it is very overt, but I guess the point I'd like to make to you personally is that your being here really sends a profound message to our nation that one person can really make a difference. One person standing up, speaking out, can overcome a lot of those obstacles for us. And you have crystallized, in a way, our consciousness here. You have been a catalyst, I think, for change in a way that we haven't seen. And I've been working on these issues for 10, 15 years. And you have raised awareness in a way that I think is very unique. So thank you not only for your risk-taking and your courage and strength in standing up, but also for the effect that it has had. And I also want to make another point, and you can tell me whether I'm correct or not. I think there are other whistleblowers out there. I think there are other truth tellers in the tech world who want to come forward. And I think you're leading by example. I think you are showing them that there's a path to make this industry more responsible and more caring about kids and about the nature of our public discourse generally and about the strength of our democracy. And I think you have given them a boost, those whistleblowers out there, in potentially coming forward. I think that's tremendously important. And I think also, and again, you can tell me if I'm wrong, there are a lot of people in Facebook who are cheering for you because there are public reports, and I know of some of my friends in this world who tell me that there are people working for Facebook who wish they had the opportunity and the courage to come forward as you have done, because they feel a lot of reservations about the way that Facebook has used the platform, used algorithms, used content, and pushed it on kids in this way. So those are sort of hypotheses that I hope you can confirm. And I also would like to ask you, because a lot of parents are watching right now. So you've advised us on what you think we should do, the reforms, some of them that you think we should adopt, stronger oversight, authorized by Congress, better disclosure, because right now, Facebook essentially is a black box for most of America. Facebook is a black box that's designed by Mark Zuckerberg Incorporated. Mark Zuckerberg and his immediate coterie, and the buck stops with him. And reform of Section 203, so there's some legal responsibility. So people have a day in court, some kind of recourse legally when they're harmed by Facebook, because right now it has this broad immunity. Most of America has no idea. Essentially, you can't sue Facebook. You have no recourse. Most America doesn't know about Section 230, and if you push a lot of members of Congress, they wouldn't know either.
It's actually slightly worse than that. Facebook made a statement in a legal proceeding recently where they said they had the right to mislead the court because they had immunity, right? That 230
Exactly.
gave them immunity, so why should they have to tell the truth about what they're showing?
Which is kind of contempt.
Shocking.
Well, it is shocking to a lawyer,
Yeah.
which some of us are. It's